And after he asked me some questions, he says, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to live here in Brandon. I want to coach here for a very long time, and I want to win championships."
Long before the banners, before the national headlines, before the weight of legacy pressed down on every practice, Brandon High School was just another program trying to matter. It was the mid-1970s, and wrestling in Florida was an afterthought. There were no super teams, no powerhouses, and certainly no dynasties. Then came a young coach named Russ Cozart. Cozart didn't arrive with fanfare. He arrived with a vision. A former collegiate wrestler with an unmatched work ethic and a relentless belief in discipline, he didn't see Brandon as it was. He saw what it could be. To him, wrestling was not a sport. It was a mindset, a culture, a way of living. He believed in total buy-in, no shortcuts, no excuses, only sweat, effort, and precision. He started by reshaping the foundation. Every drill had a purpose. Every second of practice was accounted for. If you wanted to wear the Brandon singlet, you earned it. And it didn't take long for the results to show. By the late 1970s, Brandon wasn't just winning, they were dominating. They developed a reputation for technical precision and unmatched conditioning. While other teams gassed out in the third period, Brandon was just getting started. In 1980, the Eagles won their first state championship under Cozart. It wouldn't be their last. That single victory sparked the beginning of the most dominant run in high school sports history. What followed was a tidal wave of success. State title after state title. From the early 80s on, Brandon built not a team, but an empire. But greatness doesn't come from wins. It comes from the expectation of winning. And at Brandon, the expectation was absolute. Wrestlers didn't just join Brandon, they were raised by it. Youth programs fed into the system. Middle schoolers dreamed of one day stepping into that varsity lineup. Parents arranged their lives around practice schedules. Vacations were skipped. Weekends were spent cutting weight and grinding through tournaments. It wasn't just a sport, it was a lifestyle. In the early days, people thought Cozart was crazy. But over time, they realized he wasn't crazy. He was building something no one else dared to build. And by the time the rest of Florida figured out what was happening, it was too late. After Brandon's first state championship in 1977, most programs would have celebrated, hung a banner, and hoped to do it again someday. Brandon didn't hope. They expected, and they never looked back. What came next was something high school sports had never seen. A reign of dominance so absolute, so untouchable, it felt unreal. From 1980 to 2008, Brandon won 29 consecutive Florida state titles. But it wasn't just about titles. Titles were the surface. What defined Brandon was the streak. 459 straight dual meet victories. No team in American high school wrestling history had ever done that. No team ever will again. From 1974 to 2008, Brandon went undefeated in dual meets. Over 3 decades without a single loss. Generations of wrestlers came through the program, and none of them knew what it felt like to lose a duel. Most kids grow up learning how to bounce back from failure. Brandon kids were taught that failure wasn't an option. Every Saturday morning duel, every mid-season county clash, every nationally hyped showdown. Brandon won them all. It wasn't luck. It was the system. The wrestlers trained like machines. They weren't flashy. They were efficient. No wasted motion, no panic, no fatigue. From the first whistle to the final buzzer, they wrestled with cold precision. A takedown here, a ride out there, 6 minutes of control. That's how Brandon buried you. Coaches brought their teams hoping to learn something, even if it meant being embarrassed, because if you wanted to see what greatness looked like, you had to go through Brandon. And the scary part? Brandon wasn't even peaking yet. By the early 2000s, the team had become a national powerhouse. They were ranked among the best in the country, facing and defeating top programs from California, New Jersey, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. At one point, they had 6 returning state champions in the starting lineup. At tournaments like the Cheesehead, the Clash, and Fargo, Brandon wrestlers didn't just show up, they placed, they won, they dominated. The Eagles began sending athletes to D1 powerhouses. They built a pipeline straight from the Brandon wrestling room to the NCAA. And every time a new group graduated, another wave was already ready. There were no down years, no rebuilding seasons, only reloading. The streak wasn't just a record, it was a standard. Every match carried pressure. Wrestling is not a game of luck. You don't stumble into 459 straight wins or 29 state titles. To reach that level, you need more than talent. You need a system. Brandon High School had one, and it was unforgiving, meticulous, and brilliant. At the center of it all was Coach Russ Cozart. A technician on the mat, Cozart wasn't just running a team. He was engineering a machine. Every part of the program, from the first youth takedown to the last varsity match, was part of a carefully constructed design. It started before high school. Brandon's feeder program was legendary. Kids as young as 5 were learning the same drills and techniques as the high school team. They were battle-tested before they ever put on a varsity singlet. There was no guesswork. Every practice was structured. The Brandon room became a rite of passage. You earned your spot through grind, through grit, through silence and sweat. And once you made the lineup, the pressure increased. Wearing a Brandon singlet came with weight. There was no room for ego, no margin for error. Cozart held everyone to the same standard, whether you were a state champion or a backup 106-pounder. The drills were brutal, chain wrestling repetitions for hours, non-stop, short-time scenarios. You couldn't outwork them because no one trained harder. You couldn't break them because they were already broken and rebuilt stronger. The culture was passed down year to year like a sacred tradition. Entire communities revolved around it. Even the parents bought in. They knew the schedule, they knew the sacrifices, they knew what was at stake. And what did the system produce? Wrestlers with elite technique and a legacy that rewrote high school wrestling history. Other programs had great athletes. Brandon built great wrestlers. Others had motivation. Brandon had obsession. That was the difference. That was the system. For 34 years, Brandon High School Wrestling had one answer to every question: win. It didn't matter who stepped on the mat. By the end of the night, Brandon always had more points. The streak wasn't just a number. It was the heartbeat of the program. 459 consecutive dual meet victories. But all dynasties, no matter how dominant, eventually face a reckoning. On February 2nd, 2008, Brandon High School's historic 459-match dual meet win streak came to a stunning end with a 32-28 loss to South Dade in the Graves tournament. The Eagles, unbeaten since 1974, had built a dynasty on dominance, discipline, and pressure. But on this night, South Dade flipped the script. Brandon picked up early wins and got a forfeit at 1:30 for Eric Grajales, one of the most decorated wrestlers in school history. Joey Cozart added a huge first-period pin at 1:40 to keep the team in it, but South Dade answered with bonus points in key spots, major decisions at 1:35 and 1:45, and a first-period pin at 1:71 that proved to be the turning point. A narrow 10-9 win by South Dade ultimately sealed it. Brandon still wrestled well, but for the first time in over 3 decades, it wasn't enough. The longest winning streak in high school sports was over, and the rest of the wrestling world felt the shock. When the final whistle blew on February 2nd, 2008, the streak was over. But for Brandon, the story wasn't. That night, something shifted. It wasn't just about a scoreboard, it was psychological. For 34 years, Brandon had been invincible. Coaches planned against them with hope, not expectation. Wrestlers stepped onto the mat already half-beaten. But once South Dade proved Brandon could lose, a crack split across the entire foundation of their dominance. They were still elite, still a powerhouse. But the myth, the fear, the inevitability, gone. Brandon tried to bounce back the only way they knew, by working harder. They tightened the ship, sharpened the lineup, and returned to the grind. In the years that followed, they continued to win state titles and produce studs, but things weren't the same. South Dade had changed the landscape. No longer just a rival, South Dade became the new standard in Florida. They proved they weren't a one-hit wonder. With continued success throughout the 2000s, 10s, and beyond, they started winning their own titles. Suddenly, Brandon wasn't alone at the top of the mountain. They had company. And in some years, they weren't even on top anymore. The rest of Florida took notice. Teams started to believe. Kids started choosing other programs. The gap closed. Slowly, Brandon transitioned from an empire into a legacy program. Respected, dangerous, still capable of greatness, but no longer untouchable. Wrestling had evolved. The field had caught up. And for Brandon, the pressure that once forged perfection became a ghost that hovered. Young wrestlers walked into the same room, under the same banners, feeling the weight of names like Eric Grajales, Franklin Gómez, Joey Cozart, but they weren't those guys. They weren't forged in the same fire. The culture was still strong, but the mystique had faded. In duels, Brandon could still win, but they could also lose. And that was the difference. The streak had once given them armor. After 2008, it was gone. Coach Russ Cozart remained, still focused, still intense, still chasing greatness. But even he knew the mountain had shifted, and though the banners still hang and the legacy still echoes, Brandon is no longer what it once was. They were giants. Now they're legends, and legends live differently.